All right, good morning, everybody. I will kick off this meeting. I'll call to order our October 7th City Council Housing Workshop. Microphone is now on. And we will start with the flag salute. So if everyone can please stand, face the flag, place the right hand over your heart, and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Alexander.
I'm here.
Mayor Kalfas.
Here.
Councilmember Ron.
Here.
Councilmember Schwank.
Here.
Councilmember Stewart.
All right, we are all present. We will start off with business item number 1, the only item on our agenda, which is conduct the workshop regarding existing and future housing and provide general direction regarding the same. Mr. Peters, you want to kick us off?
Good morning, Mayor, City Council members, staff, and residents. Today's housing workshop is going to be divided into 4 sections. So the first section will be presented by Heidi Urias, the city's housing and real estate analyst. And she's going to talk about the history of housing in Temecula. The second portion of the agenda will be Maricela Marroquin and Peter Thorson from RWG Law, the city attorney's office regarding state housing law. The third portion will be from Paul Mara with Kaiser Marston Associates regarding affordable housing financing. And then finally, Amanda Tropiano from De Novo Planning Group, the city's general plan consultant, will bring it all together with a discussion about housing and the general plan update. So the goals for today's workshop are to provide a historical context for the city's development pattern, explain the city's role in housing production, and begin a discussion on the future of housing in Temecula. Just to go back for a second, so we have 4 speakers today. We have 3 hours. This easily could have been a 3-day workshop. So just to set this up a little more is each speaker is going to have about a half hour. So 20-minute presentation, 10 minutes for comments, 4 speakers. That gives us 2 hours with an hour buffer. So that's the plan, just to keep things moving. Again, our goals for today's workshop. And to begin, what we want to do is just provide a big picture perspective and set things up visually, talking about the city's development pattern, looking at housing and the general plan. So I just have a brief introduction to get us going with the housing workshop. So some important dates and historical context. Everyone knows in 1989, the city incorporates, and at that time, our estimated population was 27,000 residents. And from what I understand is we might have had 1 stoplight at that time. In 1993, the city adopted its first general plan, and at that time, our estimated population was 28,500 residents. And then in 2000, our U.S. Census population was 57,716. So you see steady growth beginning with incorporation. Then in 2005, the city conducted a comprehensive update to the general plan, and at that time our estimated population was 90,000. So there was tremendous growth, but then also annexation of a couple large areas that were developed in the county, and those included Vail Ranch and the Red Hawk annexations. So we've been pro-growth from the start. In 2005, our general plan, the growth projections, so in 2005, the general plan was adopted, and that document included 20-year growth projections. 2025, here we are. So at that time, the projection was for 35,688 units and a population of 110,486. The latest census indicates that those projections were pretty accurate, and I'll talk about those on the next slide. And what we want to just make clear is that this didn't just happen randomly. It was all planned. So the way things work in the city of Temecula and a lot of other areas is residents inform the vision through public input. The city council adopts the policy document or the general plan, and then the city staff helps implement the vision and brings forward projects to the planning commission and the city council for final approval. So visually, you could see on the screen the city of Temecula, the black outline is the city boundary. You can see Winchester Road to the north, Rancho California Road in the center of the screen, and then Temecula Parkway on the south. The city is made up of approximately 37.3 square miles. We have an estimated population based on the 2024 estimate of 112,431 residents. And within the city, we have approximately 38,000 dwelling units. So 27,000 or approximately 27,000 of those are owner occupied, and another 11,000 are renter occupied. So generally, just to set this up one more time visually, the I-15 generally defines the east and west sides of Temecula. The west side can be described as being more urban, and the east side is more rural suburban. And down in the left-hand corner, you see that large block. That's actually the Santa Margarita Ecological Reserve. It's 4,500 acres owned by San Diego State, basically undeveloped. Well, when I talk about the west side being more urban, what I mean is we have the Old Town specific plan, we have the Uptown specific plan, we have the West Side Business Park consisting of industrial and a lot of truck traffic, and then we have the Altair specific plan. So when you think about the west side, think about maybe the Cameron Historical Building, 3 to 4 stories, or maybe the new apartments in Uptown, which are 4 stories. That's the kind of density we're talking about on the west side of the freeway. On the east side, you have this more suburban or rural development pattern. And when you think about the east side, you essentially have a lot of variety, or a wide variety of housing options. So you could live in a golf course community, you could be in Red Hawk or Temecula Hills, you could be in something more low density like Meadowview or Los Ranchitos. There are other specific plans that have HOAs, there are areas without HOAs. And all of those areas have apartments mixed throughout on the east side. And then there's also neighborhood serving commercial. So if you live on the north side, you don't have to travel all the way to the south side for groceries. So we have neighborhood serving commercial throughout, and then we have parks and schools throughout. So think about the north side, we have the Chaparral High School, centrally located, you have Temecula Valley, and then on the south side, you have Great Oak High School with 4 major sports parks located near each. So the best way to describe this development pattern on the east side is just to provide an example. So what we wanted to describe was the specific plan area of Harveston, or the Harveston community. And there was a lot of thought and intent that went into the Harveston specific plan. And one of the things we want to talk about is housing for the life cycle, or amenities for a variety of ages. So when you think about Harveston, let's see here, I can't really. So Harveston's on the north side. Basically, the northern boundary is Dade Street, the southern boundary is Margarita, and then you can see the lake park centrally located within Harveston. But if you're a family living in Harveston and you have kids, they can go to the daycare. There's ABC daycare. As they grow, they can walk to the elementary school. You have a K-5 elementary school. You can live in an apartment, build some equity, eventually purchase a townhome, or maybe a small lot single-family development or single-family home. As the kids get older, they can take the pedestrian bridge over to Chaparral High School. You could purchase a medium-sized lot or a little bigger lot. And then as you grow older and maybe you become an empty nester, you can downsize, move into a motor court with less maintenance. You can eventually move into senior housing, all the while enjoying parks like the centrally located lake or the regional sports park. And then also there is a trolley that runs through Harveston that was part of the original development agreement when that was approved, that can take residents over to the mall. A lot of the kids use it to get to Day Middle School because it drops you off at the mall and they could walk to Day Middle School. So that's just one example of the intent and planning that went into one of the specific plans. I could have talked about Paseo del Sol. I could have talked about Wolf Creek. And a lot of that planning has gone into a lot of our different specific plans. Some of the other features on the east side, we have the Regional Mall, the Promenade Mall, Abbott Vascular. We have the Auto Mall, MSJC or higher education, and then the Temecula Valley Hospital. So when you think about all of that, each of these has a story about the planning that went into it. And the result of the implementation of the general plan is we have a desirable city to live in with a high quality of life. So we do resident satisfaction surveys every few years. The results from the 2021 survey was 88% of the residents rate the quality of life in Temecula as excellent or good. And I know we've recently conducted an update and those results are coming soon, but all I have right now is the 2020 results. But with that success comes new challenges, and those include traffic congestion, increased cost of maintenance of buildings, facilities, and road, the need for additional public safety, and additional pressures from development in the region. So the city of Temecula is not on an island. We have neighbors to the north, we have French Valley, we have all kinds of development surrounding us. So we're a city in transition. We are evolving from a growth city to a maintenance city. And what does that mean exactly? It means in the future, we're going to have to focus on infill development instead of new expansion. We're going to have to maintain the quality of our existing development. And we're going to need to address issues before they become major problems. So transitioning to a maintenance city will require right-sized growth with a focus on circulation and mobility. So what is right-sized? We're going to find that out. We're going to figure that out through the general plan update process, through engaging residents, presenting information to the Planning Commission and City Council, and then ultimately you deciding what the right size is as we update the general plan. So there are 3 questions to consider. So before we jump into all the different presentations, just wanted to go through these questions so that you can think about these as we go through the presentations. And then at the end, Amanda is going to facilitate a discussion regarding these 3 questions. So the first, what areas of the city should be considered to address future growth to accommodate state mandated housing laws? The second question, what are your thoughts on introducing residential into existing commercial areas in terms of design compatibility? And then finally, are there other areas that you would like the GPAC or the General Plan Advisory Committee to consider for residential/redevelopment as part of the general plan update? So at this time, Mr. Mayor, I think what we can do is take public comments before we jump into the presentations. To the questions?
Yeah.
Perfect. With that, and we can just leave this up while we introduce our first public speaker. Madam City Clerk, do we have any public comments today?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we only have one public comment. Mr. Hagel, come on up. As this is a a business item, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Yep. Welcome, Mr. Hagel.
Morning. Good morning, everybody. Let me get my glasses here. I'm here to request that you consider forming a housing trust. It's another challenge that we have in our community as well as throughout the state and, for that matter, throughout the whole country. I am not suggesting it is simple. I know that they can be complex. I've spoken to several cities and counties that have formed them as well as consultants. Our city has taken on challenges in the past that has brought local control and benefit. We sued the state and Caltrans to get control over our traffic signals on our east and west roads that intersect with the freeway. We won. We formed a redevelopment agency to create a vibrant old town. It worked. We fought granite construction along with the Pachanga Band, and we were successful. Today, we have a major housing crisis, workforce housing. The income range that is struggling to purchase or rent has increased well beyond the extremely low and very low income levels. Many city employees cannot and will not be able to afford to live in Temecula or anywhere locally. This crisis means that many of the servers or people preparing our meals in restaurants cannot afford to live locally. This crisis impacts our stores and both big and small businesses such as Macy's, Abbott, Pechanga Resort Casino, our hospitals, doctors' offices, and the wineries. Have you ever noticed going into a restaurant that they're short on help in the kitchen and the waitstaff? The housing crisis contributes to this shortage. Even your sons and daughters may not be able to buy a house or even rent in our own community. This crisis is likely to get worse. The ultimate solution is not one that we want. A deep and long recession will bring down prices. Prices are determined by supply and demand. Prices will decline when demand declines, and that typically comes at a cost of jobs and working hours. We do have developers and Habitat for Humanity who have developed housing primarily for the low and very low income. Developers use state programs to help pay for a few affordable homes. They do the least to get the most, as they must make their projects pencil out to make a profit. This is not a bad thing. However, we have little or no control over the target income level, type of housing, will they be for rent or buy, or architectural amenities. With these programs, many of our housing requirements are legally waived at the developer's request. A trust is needed for supplementing these housing projects with projects that have more local control. A trust requires a local board of directors. This allows decisions as to what income ranges, housing types, ownership types, and architectural styles our community needs today and into the future. A housing or property trust is a long-term solution. The trust board can target the housing needs that are not being addressed at the time. These needs may change in the future. The trust is a long-term, locally controlled solution. The trust provides more local control than the generic one-size-fits-all state solutions. Partners are needed. Businesses have everything to gain from a locally controlled solution. Even though federal and state grants may be obtained and our city can contribute, contributions can be made large and small from businesses, nonprofits, and religious organizations. Marketing and contribution partners could include the Temecula Valley Chamber, the Wine Growers Association, the Car Dealers Association, the Rotary Club, Habitat for Humanity, and the Pechanga Tribe, Abbott, and many other big and small businesses that would benefit from additional workforce housing for income levels that are underserved by the other solutions. Contributions can be grassroots, GoFundMe projects, dollars collected at our cash register, and large contributions alike. Dedication of our local business stakeholders is needed. We need the city to start the trust and get the ball rolling. I would be happy to help in any way to assist in forming and raising money for such a adventure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hagel. Madam City Clerk, do we have any more public comments? All right. With that, we will move on to our presentation. Mr. Peters, I can kick it back over to you and see if Heidi wants to start us off.
Sounds good. Let me introduce Heidi Urias, our housing and real estate analyst.
I think my presentation is live. Great. Well, good morning, Mayor and City Council members, staff, and public. My name is Heidi Urias, and I'm the City of Temecula's housing analyst. Today, I'll be going through topics such as Temecula's housing inventory, what area median income is, also known as AMI, the County of Riverside's income categories, the regional housing needs allocation, also known as RHNA, and some actions the city has taken to try and meet our RHNA number. There's two types of housing in Temecula. There's private housing, which is housing that is privately funded, constructed, and owned. Usually, the price is determined by market demand, and there's no direct government subsidy. Then there's affordable housing within the city of Temecula, and this is housing that is subsidized by government agencies to lower cost for tenants. And so what does housing look like in Temecula? Since incorporation to today, the city has built 30,402 single-family detached homes. Currently entitled or under construction is 1,143 units, with making that about approximately 72.9% of the total unit count. The city has also built 1,351 single-family attached homes. That's your condo and townhome style homes, with 966 units currently entitled or under construction, giving us approximately 5.4 of the total unit count. The city has built 7,299 multifamily units. This is like your affordable, your apartment complex style home. And currently under entitlement or construction the city has 1,943 units, approximately 21% of the total unit count. Under mobile homes, city has completed 180 units with 3 entitled or under construction, giving us a total of 39,232 completed units and 4,055 units that are currently under entitlement or under construction. Whoa. Let's see here, sorry about that. No. There we go. Yeah, I lost the slide. All right, I think we're back on. Awesome. Under Temecula's affordable housing inventory, we have 22 single-family detached units completed, 5 under entitlement, under construction, giving us approximately 3% of the total unit count. We have 11 single-family detached homes completed, and 6 under entitlement, under construction, giving us about 2% of the total unit count. And under multifamily, 803 units have been completed, 60 have been entitled or currently under construction, giving us 95% of the total unit count, for a total of 836 completed units and 71 units under entitlement or construction. I have an asterisk there under this entitled under construction, and this represents the Uptown Temecula RFP. I'll go into details further in the presentation. And so historically in Temecula, market rate housing has provided relatively affordable options for multiple income levels. Affordable meaning reasonably priced in comparison to San Diego, Los Angeles, and Orange County. I think we've all heard of a story of someone migrating to our city from these areas. Now, before I show you the income levels, it's important to understand that affordable housing income levels are based on the area median income. And so what is the area median income, also known as the AMI? This is a figure determined annually by HUD, or the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, that represents the midpoint of a specific geographic region's household income distribution. In other words, half of the households in a specific region earn above the AMI, or the area median income, and half of the households in a specific region earn below this AMI, which is why they call the AMI the midpoint, right, of a region. The AMI is a benchmark used to set eligibility for affordable housing programs. Temecula uses Riverside County's area median income. In this next chart, I'm going to go ahead and list all of the income level categories. Okay, to the left, you'll be able to see the income levels. Now, on the low end of this income level is a one-person household with only one income earner. Right? On the high end, you will see an 8-person household with multiple income earners. So the first one here is acutely low, in which you will see one household income earner can make up to $10,900 and qualify, and a household of 8 with multiple income earners can make up to $20,600 a year and qualify for acutely low housing programs. Now to the right there is different occupations for these income levels. So under acutely low, we have a household that usually qualifies for subsidized housing such as Section 8, or a household who's receiving Social Security income. The next income level is extremely low income. And here we see occupations such as a retail associate, a hostess or a dishwasher at a restaurant, or front desk receptionist. The next one is very low income. Under this income category, we have occupations such as a dental assistant, a sergeant major in the Marine Corps, and a paralegal. Under lower income, the income category, we have occupations such as a teacher, a planning technician, deputy sheriff trainee, or a resident physician being trained here at our local Temecula Valley Hospital. And then there's moderate income. And occupations here are a registered nurse, management analyst, an associate civil engineer, or commercial pilot. And so it's interesting to note, right, that the sergeant major in the Marine Corps qualifies for very low income housing programs, as well as a resident physician working in our local hospital. And so here is the 2025 area median income chart, right? This is the chart that is updated annually. And there highlighted in red is the median income. So just a reminder, in our region, in the Riverside County region, half of the members make above the area median income and half make below the area median income, right? That's the midpoint. And so how do we read this chart? Let's focus on the middle column there for a household of 4. And so a household of 4 making $33,550 qualifies for extremely low housing programs. Now that same family of 4 making $89,500 would qualify for lower income housing programs. And so how does the city build these units for each income level? Well, the thing is, the city's role is not for the city to decide how many units are built in each income level. These numbers actually come from the state through the Department of Housing and Community Development, also known as HCD. They determine how many units at a variety of affordability levels is needed for each region in the state. And this comes through the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, also known as RHNA. From the state, the region takes these numbers, right? And our region is managed by the Southern California Association of Governments, also known as SCAG. And they ensure that local governments prepare to accommodate enough housing for these various income levels in the workforce. It's the city's role then to zone enough land to accommodate the state-assigned RHNA numbers. And so where exactly does our Regional Housing Needs Allocation number live? This number lives within a document called Temecula's General Plan, which is a state-required document that provides a blueprint for the city's future. I will not go into these details as our general consultant will later in this presentation. In the general plan, there's a document called the housing element. And so this is the city's plan for meeting the regional housing needs allocation determined by the state. So what exactly is the city's RHNA allocation? The city must accommodate for 4,193 units broken down by different income levels within an 8-year time frame. And it's important to note that it's the city's role, again, to zone enough land to accommodate our assigned RHNA units. And it's up to developers to develop these units. The city does not physically go out there and build these units. And so what is the city doing to accommodate for our total RHNA number? Here are some actions the city has taken to try and accommodate its share of the RHNA. The city has adopted an HCD-certified housing element, which is a comprehensive plan that addresses the providing housing sites, assisting in development of affordable and special needs housing, removing constraints to housing production, conserving and improving existing housing stock, affirmatively furthering fair housing, and promoting public participation. The city has also continued to invest in affordable housing, although there's no longer funding for the specific efforts like these. Through the redevelopment agency. We all know that the redevelopment agency was dissolved in 2012, and the city has invested the remainder of that funding, or continued to. The city also invested community reinvestment program funds, also known as CRP funds, and the city has also donated land to affordable housing developers in strategic areas of the city, such as Las Haciendas in Uptown Temecula and Habitat for Humanity in Old Town Temecula. The city has also streamlined residential approvals through the Uptown Specific Plan, which allows for an expedited approval and construction with modern development standards. The city created a mixed-use overlay area and as well as affordable housing overlay zone, also known as AHOZ. The city has also spearheaded new tools to speed entitlement, such as objective design standards, created permit-ready ADU plans, and updated our ordinances consistent with state law. So as a consequence of the city's continued effort, in working towards the RENA allocation, here's how the city is doing in comparison to our surrounding cities. City has built 836 affordable housing units with 161 units in the pipeline for a total of 997 units. The pipeline number does include the unit count that we will be getting through the Uptown Temecula RFP. So here is your update on the Temecula Uptown RFP. The city put out a request for proposal on June 4th for a parcel in Uptown Temecula. The city received 6 proposals with the unit count ranging from 71 to 91 units. And the Supportive Housing Subcommittee is in the process of reviewing these and will go before the full city council with a recommendation. So in conclusion, you saw the city of Temecula's housing inventory. Hopefully you were able to understand affordable income housing levels a little bit better and what the city's role is in housing the local workforce by working towards meeting the RENA allocation. And that concludes my presentation. I will pass it on to Maricela. Oh, go ahead.
Actually, what we can do, Mr. Mayor, is we can pause here. We could take questions before we move on to the city attorney presentation.
Do any of my colleagues have any questions for Heidi? Councilmember Ron?
So going back to the numbers you're presenting on both the RENA allocation and then our current portfolio in housing, we're roughly, let's just use round numbers, 1,000 units of affordable housing in the city of Temecula. Is that
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
okay? So, but the RENA numbers, so if we go just sort of proportionally, the RENA numbers say we should have about, or we're supposed to allocate 4,300 units. So we're less than a quarter of the way toward, like if we had our perfect scenario where we had all the units that were built, we're only about 20 some odd percent toward that objective, right? Which I guess that's sort of, just so I'm understanding this correctly, that's sort of the nexus here and why we're having this conversation, right? Is, I mean, you know, it's great that we allow for and we meet our RENA number obligations under our city planning, but we're simply not building the units in town to meet the actual number that's allocated, right?
Well, so I think I can address that. So the 1,000 units or the roughly 1,000 units you're seeing on the screen aren't actually being counted towards our arena, and all of them in this cycle, because many of them were built outside of this cycle or before this
So that's
cycle.
in addition to what we currently have in our stock.
So yes, so we have that from previous cycles. There are some that are being built in this cycle, which will count towards this cycle, but not all of those 1,000 units are actually getting counted towards arena for 20, that goes to 2029, I believe, right?
Yes.
So yes, we're not currently meeting all of those lower income categories with what the city is building, but it's not the arena is not intended to say that the city has to go out and fund to build for every single one of those income
No, I
categories.
get that, yeah.
It's that they do the zoning opportunity to provide for apartments, townhomes, low income, and single family homes of all shapes and sizes. And HCD looks at a specific type of housing, like a townhome, and they make an assumption about that being at certain income level. So it may not be subsidized by a government agency and have a regulatory agreement, but they will give the city credit in their arena for, let's say, moderate income, because they made the assumption that the townhome is a moderate income in your area, or the apartment is low income in your area. So we don't have to have a regulatory agreement, but we still get credit toward it. So if the developer builds it, we still get credit for it in that income category.
In that income category, but we're still only at about 1,000 units total in the city then.
Total, right? Yeah, that are low income and have a government subsidy and a regulatory agreement.
Right.
But the other units, the private units that are getting built by private developers, we will be able to go around to each one of those, and an HCD will tell us this counts towards low income, this counts towards moderate income, even though it doesn't have a government
And
subsidy.
that's what I thought. So that's where the disconnect is in the numbers, because we're not really, so can we get, I'm not saying like right now, if you can, you know,
We,
back
we,
of the
we
envelope,
can, we
but-
actually,
Yes.
we file an annual report with HCD where we go through all of those different
Okay.
categories and the assumptions, so we can pull those numbers.
Yeah, because I just want to make that clear here, is that we're not less than 20% toward our targets. We're farther along than that, but those numbers make it look like it's a lot worse in the city than it is. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, it's the annual progress report that we do every year.
Okay.
Around April. We
yeah,
submit
if
that
we
in
can get
April.
that just today, back of the envelope, something I'd appreciate.
I think, Heidi, in your slide, you had about 4,000 units that were entitled or under construction.
Correct.
So all of those units would
Will
be
work.
somehow counted against the RENA number in different income categories. And our numbers, our RENA number is
Let me go there.
4,193.
Yes. So these numbers here, I don't know if you can switch to my slide, will also be counted here. That middle column will be counted towards Arena this year. Yes.
Councilmember Scoop?
Yeah, and I did want to piggyback on his, because ADUs are considered low income, you know, and it seems like there's more ADUs popping up all over the place. So that's positive news going forward as far as, you know, lower income housing. But I did want to talk a little bit about the land trust. And as we all know, we're basically a landlocked city and 95% built out. And so there really is no place to do a land trust. Am I correct? I mean, I'm kind of, you know, when I hear the land trust, it's a great idea for a developing city or somewhere where there's lots of land that you can somehow cobble together and create this land trust and then have private companies come in and contribute to and, you know, be a part of. But in the city of Temecula, do we even have that opportunity? Is that even something that's viable?
I'm a little hesitant to get into the housing trust,
Yeah.
just because that could be a workshop unto itself, and probably will be one day.
Yeah.
But just to your specific question,
Yeah.
I would say probably there's still opportunity for a housing trust in the city of Temecula. There's ways to do it that don't include just buying raw land.
Uh-huh.
I mean, a land trust can buy houses that already built, and then just put those into their inventory. So, and I'm not an expert on a housing trust. I know there's a whole specialty there, but that's my understanding, is that, you know, it doesn't have to be raw land, build a house, and then it's a land trust. You can buy an apartment complex and put that into the land trust.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
And this may be a question for Maricela or Peter, but in regards to HCD, has there been any precedent of a city not meeting their RENA numbers? And if so, what are the enforcement capabilities that HCD has on a city? Has anything been done to cities in California before? What are the repercussions of?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think generally cities don't meet the cities plan for and zone appropriately to meet what they need to under RENA. But in terms of the production actually happening, I think that's the problem, that year after year, cities aren't producing those numbers. And so right now, HCD doesn't currently have an enforcement mechanism if you don't meet the numbers, but there is certainly an enforcement mechanism if you don't zone for to allow those numbers to be produced.
And what would it be if you did not zone properly?
Oh, they could decertify the city's housing element. They could take, civil actions against the city. They could sue the city if you're not meeting your obligations to upzone appropriately.
And Marcella, isn't there not the builder's remedy as well?
Right.
Yes. There's also builder's remedy, which allows and so that happens often when they find that you haven't upzoned. They will, under the law, there's something called the builder's remedy, where developer would essentially be able to come in and build housing anywhere in the city. And there aren't really kind of any constraints put on that generally, as long as a certain percentage is for affordable units.
There's also now very substantial fines for cities that don't comply with the housing element mandates. They used to be a couple $100 a day. Now they're running into a couple 100,000 for cities that don't comply. And in addition to that, they've expanded the number of people who can sue cities that don't comply with the housing element or don't rezone. So there's a lot of lawsuits where not the state, but housing advocates are suing. And so the cities run up big bills for attorney's fees, not only that they incur, but for the other parties as well. So for not making sure that there's enough space available and densities available for the RENA numbers, there are penalties. But as Maricela said, I agree, just not meeting that number is not subject to an HCD enforcement action.
Thank you very much. So just to make it clear for the public, essentially, we have the ability at the council level to zone, but if we don't zone properly and within the state law, they can essentially come in and develop any type of housing that they would want. Is that pretty clear?
Yes. Essentially, yes. If once HCD gets involved and, you go down the builder's remedy path, yes.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on this topic? All right, with that, we can move on to our next.
Well, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. We're going to give you a very high-level overview of the changes over the last 6 years in housing law. These laws are very complex and convoluted. There's many exceptions. There's many qualifications. Maricela and I could spend the next 3 hours talking to you without notes explaining all of this, but we'll spare you that, just at least today anyway. The presentation's really designed to give you some overall context of the housing elements, where you're going, what's happening, what to expect when housing projects come into the city. Okay, good. As the legislature, California legislature has declared that the state is in a housing crisis, and that they define that as being that there's not enough housing units to meet the demand for housing, and particularly the demand for housing units for families and persons of that are affordable to families and persons of low and moderate income housing. Now, in addition to making that declaration, the legislature has also declared that one of the primary reasons for the housing crisis is the overregulation of housing units by cities. And that's a very important factor in the laws that they have adopted. So as a result of those declarations and those purposes, the legislature has adopted many, many laws over the last 6 years that are aimed at forcing cities to build and developers to build more housing units. And in those broad legislative trends you see on the slide up above really are the kind of the context for which you're looking at the state laws relating to housing. First, the legislature has reduced city discretion over housing projects quite substantially. They require objective development standards only, no more subjective standards. Many housing units, particularly for affordable housing, are by right without city review. There's limited CEQA now on housing projects, and the city's really only allowed to address health and safety impacts, and that by a preponderance of evidence. So you really have to show quite strongly that there's a health and safety impact before you can deny or condition a project. Second, the legislature has increased residential development capacity in cities. And these are the types of laws that you've heard about, the SB 9 lot splits that allow people to divide a single-family residential zone into 2 lots. The ADU legislation that originally started many years ago as a simple accessory dwelling unit so that somebody's parents or grandparents could live in the back of the house, and now they're much more involved in that. There's also legislation that allows residential development on commercial lots and religious institution properties, again, expanding the capacity for residential development. Third, the legislature has encouraged more affordable housing. And with that comes the denser housing, because the affordable housing, in order to reduce costs, they increase the density. And that is the whole basis behind the RENA allocation numbers, trying to decide how many affordable units are required, which forces the rezoning to higher densities. There's also the density bonus law that Maricela will talk about in a little while, which allows developers to increase density, allows them to get waivers of development standards, all with the idea of expanding the number of affordable units that are allowed in the project, as well as above moderate income units. The affordable units are only a small part of that. The fourth broad category is that the legislature has streamlined and expedited housing approvals. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's now limited discretion by the city in approving housing projects. Before, the city had complete control over what housing projects would be approved or not approved. You could impose all kinds of conditions to make it compatible with the community. It was the whole concept of smart growth from the late 1990s and early 2000s. Now that discretion is extremely limited. There are a lot of by right building permits only for housing projects and not a discretionary approval. CEQA's limited. They've limited the number of public hearings that the city can have on a housing project so as not to allow the public opposition to stall the project. And you also now have a very stringent timeframes, 30 or 60 days to approve a project, or it's deemed approved. The fifth broad category is that the legislature has strengthened the state enforcement. And we talked about that just a minute ago. The fines have enforced, the builder's remedy, and the significant increase in state employees designed to enforce that. Now, the legislature's declarations and these trends are really important with respect to the housing laws, because this will guide you and the community to know exactly what will happen when a project comes to the city for housing units, and the city needs to approve that. It's also important because with the intensity of the legislation over the last 6 years, the volume of the legislation, there are a lot of ambiguities, there's a lot of conflicts in the legislation, and the courts look at the declarations and look at these broad categories in deciding how to resolve those conflicts. So with that very brief introduction, I'll turn it over to Maricela to go through some more specifics.
So first, we're going to cover housing elements law. Next slide, please. And then I'll skip this one because Heidi covered it. So in terms of the housing element, it's comprised of a list of properties that accounts for the city's RENA allocation. And the sites are selected based on their realistic development capacity. The housing element identifies the number of units that can be accommodated on each site, and also identifies the proposed income level for each of those sites. That means that the city has to ensure that the properties are appropriately zoned to accommodate the need for lower income households. And and this is kind of the really important part, if during the housing element cycle, there aren't sufficient sites to accommodate the lower income households, then the city has an ongoing obligation to upzone properties. So in the housing element site, there are properties that are identified at each income level. So let's say there was one that was identified for very low income households, but then market rate is built there. Well, the city doesn't get credit anymore for a lower income household category because market rate went there. And so over time, when you're at the beginning of at the beginning of the planning cycle, it doesn't matter as much. As you get towards like the middle or towards the end, it starts to matter a lot more to make sure that you have sufficient capacity to account for those lower income household categories. And so there's a lot of effort put at the planning end side to keep track, to see how sites are actually developing, and then to do that no net loss analysis to determine when it's appropriate to have to start upzoning additional sites. Next slide, please. Oh, I think we're there already, sorry. So a non-vacant site that is used for lower income RENA in a prior housing element, and a vacant site that has been included in 2 or more consecutive planning periods in the housing element cannot be used again in the housing element unless it's zoned to allow up to 30 dwelling units per acre, and that it allows for by right housing developments if at least 20% of the units are set aside for affordable households. And so this use by right means basically no SEQA and no conditional use permit, development plan, any other sort of discretionary approval. Yes.
I'm sorry, so you're saying if you have a vacant site that goes through two housing cycles, it can no longer be used for the
If
arena?
we used it in Arena for 2 prior housing cycles and we're using it again, then we have to create a by right approval process, because in the mind of the state, it's, well, you've had it there for 8 years plus for the 2 different planning cycles, and it's clearly not gone for residential uses. So let's do something else to incentivize it to be constructed. And so that's the by right approval process. And so what the city did was create the AHOZ, which Heidi briefly touched upon. And so the AHOZ is a tool that is used to create a by right approval process. If a developer comes in, agrees to set aside 20% for affordable, there's a restrictive covenant that is recorded against the property, then they get to go through a much more streamlined process. It doesn't ever go to planning commission or the city council for approval. And an example of that is a Rancho Las Bolsas project, where that did go through the HOZ. That is a project that's 247 units with 55 set aside for affordable housing. Those are all for rent units, and that again, it never went to a single hearing because they were able to avail themselves of the AHOZ process, which is one of the ordinances of the city. And I should note the AHOZ is not just put on residential properties, but it's also on some non-residential sites where and I think it's business park sites, if a project is going to come in a business park, and it's one of the identified sites, and if they build residential there, set aside 20%, then they can have residential on what otherwise wouldn't be a residential use of property. Next, we're moving on to density bonus law. Density bonus law requires local jurisdictions to grant developers a density bonus, or the ability essentially to build more units than it would normally be allowed, in exchange for setting aside a certain percentage of the units for affordable housing. So by setting aside just 5% for very low income households, developers are able to obtain a 20% density bonus, meaning they can build 20% more units than they otherwise would have been able to under the city's zoning laws. The more units that are made available to qualifying households, the greater the density bonus. So it's essentially like a sliding scale. For 100% affordable projects, 80% has to be for lower income households, and 20 can be for moderate income households. And if they meet those thresholds, then they can get an 80% density bonus, meaning 80% more units than they otherwise would have been able to construct, unless the project is near a major transit stop or a very low vehicle area, in which case there are no maximum controls on density. They could do 100% density bonus at that stage. There's also density bonuses for senior housing projects. And so for senior housing projects, they don't actually even need to set aside any of the units as affordable. If it's a senior housing project, they can get a density bonus for that type of project. Next slide, please. So, and there's also something called a stackable bonus, where if you meet certain threshold levels, you get, kind of additional density bonuses. That's complicated. I won't get into that. The developers are also entitled to receive a specific number of incentives or concessions based on the percentage of affordable units that are being constructed. And essentially, the greater the number of affordable units, the greater the number of incentives and concessions that a project receives. And that, again, it's a complicated chart that under density bonus law, and we work really closely with staff to make sure those thresholds are met. Incentives and concessions include a reduction in site development standards or a modification of zoning code requirements or architectural design standards. It could be reductions in mandatory parking requirements, approval of mixed-use zoning in conjunction with the housing project if the commercial, office, industrial, or other land uses will reduce the cost of constructing the residential component of the project. And other regulatory incentives can also be waived under the incentive concession category. Moving to the next slide, there's also waivers of development standards where the applicant may request a reduction or waiver of a development standard that has the effect of physically precluding development meeting the affordable housing thresholds at the densities or with the concessions or incentives permitted by state density bonus law. So basically, you get to waive any of the development standards if you are a density bonus project, so long as the city doesn't make a health and safety finding where there would be where the city can demonstrate that it's actually going to impact the health and safety in a particular way. Examples of waivers include waiving height limits, setbacks, open space requirements, exceeding floor area ratios. Essentially, any development standard could potentially be waived under density bonus law. And so examples, we've had in this year two density bonus projects that I'm aware of. One is the Serafina project, which it went to the Planning Commission earlier this year. That is a 113 unit single family residential for sale project where 6 units were set aside for lower income households. They actually didn't seek an increase in the density. What they really sought was a waiver of certain development standards. And due to like shape, the configuration of their project site, they needed to waive some like setback requirements, some lot width requirements, and that's what they did under density bonus law. And then more recently, the Habitat for Humanity project was approved, which put in 6 single-family, wholly affordable residences, and those are also for sale. And that project also didn't seek to increase the density. They actually sought a decrease in the density for that project site, which was the incentive concession they sought. And then they sought to waive a couple of the development standards also related to minimum lot width, lot area, reduced setbacks to just make the project fit on that site. And that was the Habitat for Humanity project was a project that had a development agreement on it. Because the city was investing, actually it was disposition development agreement. Yeah, the city was providing land. Under density bonus law, there's also reduction in parking requirements. So density bonus projects get to have special parking standards. So if it's a density bonus project, we set aside what's in the development code and we look to what's under state law, which is for 0 to 1 bedrooms, it's 1 parking space, 2 to 3 bedrooms, 1.5 parking spaces, 4+ bedrooms, 2.5 parking spaces. And the city is not allowed to add anything in addition to those standards. And if it's a wholly affordable project, there's no parking requirements. And with that, I'll turn it back to Peter to talk about ministerial approvals in residential neighborhoods.
Thank you. There's 3 ministerial approvals, the urban lot splits, SB9, and the duplexes, the ADUs and the JADUs, and the small lot subdivisions. You'll hear the word ministerial used quite a bit. And basically what this means is that you have no discretion in approving the project, whether it's the city staff or the planning commission or the city council. You just apply the objective standards. It's like issuing a building permit. When the building permit is issued, the building official looks at the plans and says their plumbing is of a right size, it's in the right configuration, therefore it's approved, and that now applies to these types of housing projects. You don't have we're going to look and see whether or not this is compatible with the neighborhood. We're going to look to see what impacts there are in the neighborhood or the surrounding uses, what impacts there are on the roads and streets. You're just applying the standards and approving the permit. The old standards used to be compatibility with the neighborhood. It furthers the general health, safety, and welfare, and those are no longer standards that we use for this.
Can I ask on the health and safety for denials, though, does that still apply? So if you put additional housing units in an area that's already impacted for, say, fire risk, and so you're going to add in, doubling the number of residential units in an area that can't evacuate properly.
Yes, those can apply, but they've increased the standard of proof that you have to show there's a health and safety problem. It's no longer substantial evidence where it was essentially the experts in the city saying, gee, we think there's a safety problem there. You actually have to do a study, establish the safety problem or the health problem, as opposed to just having people say, we think there's a safety problem.
Jesus. Can we look into that a little bit more?
Yeah.
And as the city is going through its evacuation planning process with our EOC, I'd hate to see us in a place where, there's got to be some sort of threshold that, and it's not just, expert opinion or public safety's opinion, but some analysis that's provided that provides more than just, substantial evidence that says, if we increase these neighborhoods by 30%, then we are going to have a failure of evacuation. So that at least we have some prior planning knowledge to say, we've already approved, 29 units, and that 30th unit's going to push us over that threshold, right? Otherwise, every time something kicks in, we're not going to want to do a separate analysis for this. So we want to be a little bit prospective on that, I would imagine.
You're absolutely right. And that's why the city has gone back and converted a lot of the typical conditions of approval that were used on projects and put them into the zoning code as development standards that are objective standards.
Yeah.
And this would be the same thing. City's going to have to go through the areas where development is occurring and come up with objective standards that deal with evacuation plans and the number of units. I think the fire code and the building code has an objective standard of, well, you can have a cul-de-sac, but it can only be so many feet long. And those types of standards would need to be applied to evacuation routes and when those types of things kick in. So the more you can make it objective, the more you can take away the, gee, there's going to be a health problem here, we need to do a study. You have to be proactive rather than reactive to a housing development.
And could we, I don't want to drag out the general plan update, but can we memorialize those thresholds or those concepts into the general plan?
I think they've already put that on the list of things that need to be done.
Okay.
We have.
Thank you.
So if we go on to slide number 26, I'm going to cover this one just briefly. Go back. Next one. Yeah, the SB 9 provides duplex projects as well as an urban lot split. So on a single family home, you can have a ministerially approved 2 units on the single family lot. And if we go to the next slide, that was probably the original voyage of the state into changing the way we do business, and that was the SB 9 urban lot splits, where you can divide a single-family residential property into 2 lots and allow for development and multiple units there. And then if we go to the next slide, ADUs we've all known about, ADUs on single-family lots. They can either they require building permit approval only. You can either add a separate ADU to the lot, or you can have a junior ADU, which is the conversion of a portion of the home into an ADU. And then if we go to the next one, yes, this is a bit new. These are ADUs and multifamily units. And this allows the owners of apartment houses and condominium projects to convert non-livable space to ADUs. These would be garages, storage areas, common areas, and it can be up to 25% of the existing number of units in the multifamily project. Now, they can also build detached ADUs on a multifamily project, but that has a maximum of 8 and cannot exceed the number of existing units on the site. And so with that, the next one is the new legislation that allows small lot subdivisions. Again, it's a ministerial approval. It meets state standards. The city cannot impose separate standards for the small lot subdivisions. You have 60 days to approve them, but you can only apply the state standards and not additional city standards. So again, denial is only based on specific adverse impacts by a preponderance of the evidence. And that's it for ministerial approvals.
So if we can move to the next slide. So I'll be covering housing projects on commercial sites. AB 2011, known as the Affordable Housing and High Roads Jobs Act, creates a ministerial approval process for 2 types of housing projects where office, retail, or parking are considered principally permitted uses. The first housing type is an entirely affordable housing type, and then the other one is where it's a mixed income housing type along a commercial corridor, which generally means a street with a right-of-way width of 70 to 150 feet. These projects are subject to a host of development standards, including maximum site size, location restrictions based on surrounding zoning, density requirements. They cannot be located on or adjacent to a site with more than a third of a built square footage dedicated to like an industrial use. They also can't be located on a site within a neighborhood plan that prohibits multifamily residential development of at least 5 units, and they cannot be located in a very high fire severity zone. A key part of AB 2011 is that the project proponent has to commit to certain labor requirements, including the payment of prevailing wages to the construction workers, which sometimes makes the projects cost prohibitive. The next slide I'll be covering is the Middle Class Housing Act of 2022, which was SB 6. This passed at the same time as AB 2011, and it essentially allows housing on sites where office, retail, or parking are principally permitted uses. So it's somewhat similar to AB 2011. There's definitely some overlap. 100% residential projects and mixed-use projects that provide at least 50% residential uses are principally permitted uses on sites that allow office, retail, or parking. And they have to meet or exceed the minimum density under housing element law, which would generally be 30 dwelling units per acre. However, unlike AB 2011, which does provide for a ministerial approval process, SB 6 projects don't have a separate ministerial approval process, but they can rely on other ministerial approval processes under state law to get it approved, or they would just go through the regular approval process under the city. And there are also labor requirements of payment of prevailing wages for these types of projects. So essentially, they're allowing for residential to go on commercial, industrial, and parking sites. This year, there was an amendment, AB 2243, which amended both of those bills to make it more, usable and expand the potential sites where these types of projects could be built. And so it now applies to regional malls. A regional mall is defined as a site that meets the following criteria. The permitted uses on the site include at least 250,000 square feet of retail use. At least 2/3 of the permitted uses on the site are retail uses, and at least 2 of the permitted retail uses on the site are at least 10,000 square feet in size. And it also now changed the law to say that if parking is considered a principally permitted use on a site, even if a conditional use permit is required. So if there was, a parking lot that could be built there with a CUP, under this new legislation, that can now become a housing site if they meet, certain other criteria. And for these types of projects, they've also streamlined the process where projects have to be approved very quickly. So if it's 60 days, if it's 150 units or less, or within 90 days for 150 or more units, yes.
Are these things CEQA exempt?
Yes, because if they're going through the ministerial approval process, then yes, they would be CEQA exempt
Because
projects.
that's the only thing that would make any sense with
Right.
60-day
If they're
approval.
not,
Yeah.
yes, agreed.
Yeah.
If they're not if they aren't going through a ministerial approval process, then they would have to comply with CEQA. And I agree. Then it's how do you meet that criteria? Unless it's an infill development, I mean, there'd be CEQA exemptions you could probably rely on.
So to be a ministerial approval, no CEQA, and no ability for the city to hold a public hearing, correct?
Yes, if it's a ministerial project, yes.
So the last, I don't know, 50 years or so of environmental justice cases and lawsuits and, recognition under CEQA is just out the door. So we can just kind of throw these things in any industrial or commercial area where we historically have said this is unhealthy living conditions for populations based on, pollution, transportation, adjacent uses.
If they meet certain criteria, if they meet specifically the state mandated criteria, then yes, CEQA goes out the door because it would be.
So all environmental protections for the health of folks who can't afford housing is being thrown out the door. So we put them back into areas that are high risk to health and safety, all in the name of building housing.
Potentially, yes. I mean, there was also for one of the bills, they weren't allowed to be within 500 feet of freeways, and then it was like, oh, but if you put a central air system in, then it's okay.
Oh.
So
It's
yes.
a good thing our legislators are short-sighted then. Okay, thanks.
There's, what you say is true. CEQA's gone, and there is the limited health and safety exemptions, but you have to work really hard to establish that there's a health problem. And in a lot of places, the legislature has made that determination already.
So recognizing that there's tons of, I don't mean to diverge here, but recognizing that there's tons of literature and research supporting the fact that, children, seniors, at-risk populations are at higher risk for cancer, respiratory disease, cardiac disease, living in these sorts of locations. Who then carries the liability? Does the city or does the state? Nobody's sued yet, so somebody should.
Nobody's sued.
Yeah.
Cities don't have liability for the approval of permits, so it wouldn't be the city.
So it'd be the state for incentivizing something. It just, attorneys out there should be looking at this as a future case. That's ridiculous.
And just to be objectively clear, to reiterate what you said, the city has limited or no discretion on approval of developments of some of these affordable housing projects, and unless based on objective health and safety standards. Is that correct? So essentially, if there's a development that comes before the council, a lot of people just say, hey, you can just say no. We don't have that ability.
That's correct. You have to have objective design and development standards that you can just apply yes or no. It complies or it doesn't comply. If there's some new issue that comes up, somebody says, hey, this is going to create too much traffic over here, then you don't have the ability to deny that project.
Thank you very much. And just with all of these Assembly bills and Senate bills, we are not aware of any such bill that would allow only American families to purchase single-family homes. Is that correct? There's no bill limiting the ability for corporations or foreign entities to not buy up single-family homes. Would you say that's correct?
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah,
at
I'm
the
not
state
aware of
level.
anything either. I know there's been a lot of talk about that, but we haven't seen anything enacted or even introduced.
Thank you.
Can we, in the general plan update, to maybe put a placeholder there that discusses the city's, I guess, thresholds or something for litigation against the state and the developer? If a project comes forward that we just deem as wholly unacceptable for its location based on, health risk or other risk to the community that would be living there, and it avoids, CEQA entirely. They've eliminated any possibility of folks standing up for these communities in lieu of, affordable housing. And so I'd like to see something in our language in the general plan that at least acknowledges the fact that, it's unacceptable for us to see housing going into places that are high risk for populations. And if that's the case, we reserve a right to, challenge these projects. I just hate to see that crop up in industrial area or, vacant lands and, commercial space that has high pollution or one of those issues.
I understand what you're saying. I'm not quite sure how we would do it, but the city would always have the ability to say, hey, look, there's a health problem if you build residential housing in this area. Now, the degree to which you're going to need to prove that and the degree to which you're going to be successful in denying that project is up in the air. But that's always a possibility. And I think in the general plan, we can acknowledge some of those potential issues.
Or at least a level of scrutiny that goes into this, regardless of whether it's, ministerial or not. That's still, I think, a city's responsibility to provide that
Yeah, and
oversight.
again, looking at the objective development standards.
Right. Yeah.
Are you within X feet of something that may be harmful to the people that live there?
Right. Okay.
Any further questions on this topic? All right, we will move on to topic number 3 here.
Yes.
Good morning, Mayor Kalfas and members of the council. Paul Maurer with Kaiser Marston Associates, and I'm going to talk about how affordable housing is financed. Just by way of introduction, Kaiser Marston is an economic consulting firm that works almost exclusively for public agencies on real estate, land use, market, fiscal issues, but a great deal of our work is in affordable housing policy, affordable housing developer selection and transactions. I'm joined here today with my colleague, Reena Patel, who's sitting behind me. I'm glad we could both be here. We've worked with the city for probably over 20 years on affordable housing development. So many of the developments that we're going to talk about that are in the ground today or coming, we've had the opportunity to work with you. So first of all, affordable housing basics, we're going to be talking primarily about affordable rental housing and primarily up to extremely low, very low, and low, up to 80% of area median income. There are some ownership examples, restricted affordable ownership housing, including here in Temecula. But the preponderance of restricted affordable housing statewide and nationally is rental occupancy. The formulas typically set rents to be limited to 30% of household income. For rental, the covenants are typically in place for 55 years, restricted, subject to the annual income chart issued by HUD or the State Housing and Community Development Department. For ownership, if it's a long-term covenant, it's typically 45 years. In terms of rental housing, we'll talk in more detail in a moment, but the funding sources are typically a first mortgage supported by the income of the development at those lower rents. The low-income housing tax credit program, which we'll go into more detail, and then various state or local soft loans, meaning they do not have a hard debt service payment. They're repaid subject to cash flow availability over the course of the 55 years. And then some developments also use Section 8 project-based vouchers on some of the units. I think you may agree, if you're familiar with the affordable housing here in Temecula, that the development standards are very high quality, similar to market rate housing, and that's been our experience in all the jurisdictions where we work. Very high quality developments are created. Heidi talked, you had your own version of the slide on the RENA numbers that sets the context for delivering affordable housing in the city. I just wanted to point out that the first 3 rows at extremely low, very low, and low income, up to 80% of area median income, those are the rows where most of the funding sources are available, the low-income housing tax credit, the state funding sources, and so on. And the unit count in your current RENA, your targets equate to about 50% of the 4,100. It's about 2,100 units in those three categories combined. Here's just a snapshot of what do affordable rents look like, just to give you the magnitude, sort of the metrics. And then we did a survey through CoStar Group. What are some typical market rents in the community today, citywide today? So the green column on the right is just pulled from CoStar, which is a real estate research firm, as to typical market rents, $2,100 for a one bedroom to $3,100 for a three bedroom. And then as you look across the chart, we give you the four major income categories: extremely low, very low, low, and mod. What's interesting is a lot of the units we'll be talking about are being restricted around 50 or 60% of median, the middle two of the brown columns. A 50% unit is around $1,000 for a one bedroom, $1,300 for a three bedroom, just approximate order of magnitude of what the current rent restriction would be. Low income units are restricted. The population can earn up to 80% of median, but the formula in the state law is at 60% of median. So you'll see the rent in the low income column is not much higher than the rent in the very low income column. What's also noteworthy is moderate income is very close to market. If you look at the last two columns, the numbers are very similar, above or slightly below the current market data that we extracted. Just contextually on the affordable housing developments in Temecula, these are just some examples that I pulled together for this slide, mostly because I wanted to distinguish with and without the low-income housing tax credit, because you're waiting for me to explain what that abbreviation was, because we're going to talk a lot about tax credits. But you here in Temecula, when you had your redevelopment agency, you did 4 affordable housing developments in Old Town without tax credits. I believe those were all with a developer named Dalton. And those are on this side of Old Town, this side of the creek in the core of Old Town. So those did not rely on external subsidies other than the contribution from the city's redevelopment low and moderate housing fund at the time. Those, I believe, were all developed in the 2000s or early 2010s. And then most affordable housing nationally and statewide is developed with tax credits. And I think the 3 most recent projects here in the city are the renovation of Mission Village, which is at the top of Pujol Street, on the west side of Old Town, Las Haciendas in Uptown, which opened 2 years ago, maybe-ish, year plus. Okay. And Vine Creek, which is under construction now, also on Pujol Street. So those are all developments that have used tax credits, which is the typical way of funding affordable housing. So the low-income housing tax credit program is a federal program that was established in 1986 as part of the Tax Reform Act at that time. And it's the primary generator of affordable rental housing nationally. What it does, I'm going to paraphrase the words on my screen here, but it creates an incentive for private entities that don't have anything to do with the real estate itself, like banks and large corporations, to redirect their income tax obligation by investing in the affordable housing. So instead of paying the federal government their full tax bill each year, they spend some manner of energy and resources forming partnerships with affordable housing developers to infuse the dollars into those affordable housing projects. And in exchange, they get a tax credit on their federal income tax liability. So it's not about the property taxes of the development, although most affordable housing is exempt from property taxes. That's the typical way it's done. Even if it's a for-profit affordable housing developer, they'll have a nonprofit partner, they'll qualify for a property tax exemption. But the low-income housing tax credit program, we're talking about a federal income tax obligation of a private sector investor that is in business of forming these partnerships with affordable housing developers, infuse the money up front as basically free cash to the project in exchange for taking a 10-year credit on their federal tax bill. So that's how I would summarize it. Now, each state has an allocation of tax credits, and each state decides how to allocate the tax credits through a competitive process. So here in California, the State Tax Credit Allocation Committee, TCAC, allocates the 9% tax credits, which is the more generous tax credit, through a competitive process that developers apply twice a year and try to win the tax credits. And I'll talk about also the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, CDLAC, allocates the 4% tax credits, but indirectly by allocating tax-exempt bonds for the projects. So let me go to that slide. So here I've drawn a distinction between the 4 and 9% programs. I think it's important to mention, so typically all these units are restricted 55 years, and the average affordability across the units is going to be 50% of area median income, the 50%. The units will range from about 30% to 80% of area median income. If there are units above 80% of area median income, either unrestricted or restricted at moderate, they're not eligible for tax credits. So that's not very common. Developers will want to do 100% affordable, not to exceed 80%, typically averaging closer to 50. The 4% program, as I mentioned, the developers apply to CDLAC for an allocation of tax-exempt bonds. Just means that they're going to be able to have a first mortgage that is interest-free for the lender. When the lender lends that money to the project, and the developer repays the money, the lender's not paying taxes on it. So it'll be a more favorable interest rate. But more wonderful about the tax-exempt bond is that it's the pathway to the 4% tax credit, which is we call the automatic 4% tax credit. If you get a tax-exempt bond allocation, then you are automatically eligible for the 4% credit, which is less than half the value of the 9% credit. So why doesn't everyone go for the 9% credit? Because it's more competitive. More developers are trying to get that money. It's twice as generous. So developers are constantly evaluating their options between these two programs to win this money, and sometimes have to apply in multiple rounds before they're successful in bringing the dollars in. But that's only part of the story. The most affordable housing development has layers of funding sources. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a first mortgage. It's an apartment development where tenants are paying rent at 50% area median income, plus or minus. That rent is more than enough to cover the operating expenses, but only covers a certain amount of debt service. So the permanent loan is relatively small. So the first mortgage on the project is relatively small. Then there's what we call the equity investment from the tax credit investor. Typical range is in a 4% project, that equity that's sort of gifted to the project by the investor is about 30% of project costs. And in a 9% project, it's about 70% of project costs. So it's an enormous contribution from the federal government by virtue of not taking their taxes from the developer. Instead, it's being redirected into, taxes from the tax credit investor, it's being redirected into the project. Then there's federal and state loans and grants, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And typically there's a contribution from a local city or county, which we call the gap financing, the final gap after all other monies are identified. So in terms of these other programs, so I'm an affordable housing developer. I've got a site, I've got a plan for a project. The city where I'm developing likes my plan and is going to guide me through the entitlement process. They may even be willing to provide me gap financing if they have resources. I have relationships with tax credit investors. I talk to them, say, do you want to get involved in this project? I get an agreement with them. I apply for the tax credits or the tax-exempt bond and tax credits. But to complete my capital stack of what it takes to close the cost of the project, I often need one of these other programs. And so there's a variety of federal programs, state programs, and then the local contributions. In terms of the state programs, they're all a little bit starved right now in the current state budget situation. So since last fiscal year budget, so we first learned in January 2024 that there'd be great cuts to these programs in terms of the dollars available. And then that manifested in the FY25 budget. The affordable housing developers are working harder to get this layer of funding that's in the middle column through one or another of these various sources, and having to apply to more programs and sometimes more rounds. So it's a little more difficult right now, all other things being equal, for them to track down the funding. Again, these programs almost exclusively are for 80% AMI and below. That's the lower income threshold and below. And typically, developers are coming to the local jurisdiction for the final contribution, which could a typical figure we see, because we do this work in many jurisdictions, is about 100,000 per unit. So the final contribution could be on the order of 100,000 per unit. The range is quite broad because there's a lot of different variables that affect a project. And then just to sum up how that works, again, we call that the financing gap. It's the difference between the total available funding sources and the estimated development costs. Cities work with someone in our capacity or someone like us to analyze the developer's pro forma model and bless that the costs are appropriate, they're chasing all the right sources, they're going after all the money they can, and that the gap that they're presenting to you is reasonable. And it also matches what we're experiencing, because we track these projects in other jurisdictions at the same time. And that results in a request to a local city or county. So I think that was my last slide, and be happy to respond to any questions.
Yeah, the tax credits that are for affordable housing, could that be used in a land trust situation? Could those credits be made available in the purchase of land trust? Yeah.
No, they are very specifically targeted to a project that is ready to proceed, a vertical project.
Okay.
So a land trust might queue up a development. They've got entitlements and they've got all their other funding, and they're applying to tax credit program. If they're awarded tax credits, they need to break ground on the building in 6 months.
Well, what if it's like was mentioned about an existing, like say an apartment complex, wanted to be purchased for a land trust?
Yes.
Could tax credits be used for that?
Yes, they'd have to be, again, that development would have to be all queued up. They have site control, or they've already purchased it. They have entitlements. They have plans. They're going to renovate it, and they're going to put 55-year covenants on it. And when they get their award, they're going to close escrow and record the covenants and start the renovation in 6 months.
Now, those are for specifically rental units only, not for purchase.
Yeah,
correct?
tax credits are only for rental.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to emphasize on that 6-month timeline he talks about, because we have seen before projects lose their financing, their tax credit financing, if they do not meet that very strict deadline.
Could you go back to slide 5 on this presentation for me?
Sorry, good. Oh. Yeah.
And just help me make sense of this one here. So, for instance, an affordable housing complex, and I'm looking at the moderate income, 110% AMI. In theory, someone who is in a moderate income, affordable housing, one-bedroom apartment could be paying more than the market rate rent.
In theory, but they presumably would not do that. They would look for a market rate unit at the lower rent. That if you have worked with a developer to put restrictions on a development that included moderate units, that would be the rent ceiling that you would remind them each year. That's the maximum rent you can collect from the tenant. But there's still market-based factors, within affordable housing. So if the tenant is aware there's market rate housing available in the community, $200 a month less, they might choose to move. So we don't typically see rents above market in any affordable housing pro forma or current rent roll. what we do see, even at low income in some communities, when we receive a pro forma from a developer, they will sometimes carry a rent below the low income ceiling because they think the local market is not that high. It's not at the low income ceiling. So similar to the question you're asking.
Okay, yeah, that one jumped out at me. I was just thinking, and I'd have to look to see, and I don't know if anyone knows if we have any affordable housing complexes in Temecula that do have the moderate income 110% limit, and that was the rent, and say the average market rate was less. My question would be, what exactly are we subsidizing? If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we have any complexes in Temecula that have 110% AMI that is 2285, and then the average market rate is less.
I think Heidi has answered that question. I don't think we have any developments that are charging beyond the actual market rent or even really close to it.
That is correct. We do have the 4 Old Town projects that Paul mentioned earlier in his presentation do have 110% AMI units or moderate income units. They are not at that max, and you have to remember too, there's also things like utility allowances that cause the total overall rent, the max allowed rent, to decrease.
Got it, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Quick question for you, and something I was going to ask. So when you're looking at the utilities and the cost, there are some areas obviously where they're keeping costs down for these individuals. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is correct. So for example, at Madera Vista, which is right there down Margarita, they recently they converted all of their water heaters to electric through an organization, and they have solar panels there. So that they're trying to reduce cost at the site level.
And as we're seeing these rates, I mean, just this last year alone, since summertime, we're seeing utility rates rise. That's still going to obviously have an effect on these individuals and how much they're going to have to pay out, because it'll still soar and go up along with all of us. Is that correct?
That is correct. And every year, the Riverside County Housing Authority issues new utility allowances. So these utility allowances are increased every year based on what's happening.
And is it a percentage again on their salary? In essence,
Utility allowances are not a percentage based on salary. They're strictly, this is the utility allowance for electricity. This is the utility allowance for someone using gas water heater. It's just a set number.
I'm sorry about my ignorance. So is it that they're allowed to have only certain amounts, or how much they
May
pay?
I clarify? Yeah, my bad, because I didn't read this footnote here. The footnote 2. These numbers on the not green, the brown side of the table, these numbers are what we call gross rent. For any individual development where you have covenants, restrictions on the units, you would subtract the appropriate utility allowance using the county chart. So let's just say it's $100 or $125 aggregate utility allowance for a 2-bedroom unit. The 2-bedroom rents that you see on the screen would be $125 lower. That'd be the net rent applicable to that project. So my bad, I didn't mention that clarification. So when we do an annual chart like this for no specific project, we leave it at the gross rent level. For some jurisdictions, we do a chart for every single development in the city, and we have the utility profile, and we pull those figures and make the subtraction.
So for instance, just to understand this, extremely low income, so if we're looking at a 2-bedroom at 701, right? Let's say they take off $100.
Yeah.
Is that mean it doesn't matter how much of the utility they use? They're just paying that amount, but it comes off that.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, in your example, they pay 601 rent.
Okay.
And they pay their actual utility bills, whatever they are.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
They have a $100 credit off the rent by state formula. I mean, it's a formula in the state law, but they get that credit down from the rent for a generic utility allowance from the county chart. And then they manage their own utility bills, whatever they may be.
And my last question on that, does also that depend upon how many people are within that unit? So for instance, if somebody has a bigger family, 2-bedroom, but let's say they have several kids, does that change anything? Or it's like, hey, you get this amount of credit and that's it?
No, it doesn't. The utility allowance, it comes from a county chart that just says number of bedrooms.
Okay.
So
that's what it goes off.
so they get 100, let's say it's 100 for a 2-bedroom, just hypothetical figure. and they're a large family and they take a lot of showers, or, cause a lot of hot water or whatever, then it might cost them more than 100.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That
Yeah.
clarifies a lot for me. Thank you.
Councilmember Stu?
So is there any flexibility in these rents? Because you had mentioned that the rents are not necessarily, they're not going to be above the market rate. And so is the rent set by a specific chart or number and, we can't go above or below it?
Council members, so the mix of income levels in a development is determined at the early stages when the project's being planned and starts applying for funding. So the developers, we often see pro formas that have rents at 30, 40, 50, and 60, maybe 70% AMI, all these different levels distributed across the bedroom mix. You can imagine it's a whole grid. There's 3 one-bedrooms at 30% and so forth and so on. They've gone through the applications for the funding sources and decided the optimal mix to score well and win the funding. And then that's going to be locked down in the covenant with the tax credit committee.
And is that for 55 years?
Yes. And so the second part of your question, I think, is every year HUD and state HCD issue these updated income charts for Riverside County by household size and AMI level, and we have to translate that into what would be the current maximum rent. Now, in recent years, the incomes are going up a lot. According to these charts, incomes are going up a lot. And so the rents have gone up in recent years more than they did during the recession or during the pandemic.
Right.
So during those 55 years, there are rent increases.
Okay.
Just kind of not market-based because they're really based on these income charts that come from the government.
Okay. Yeah, so there's not a lot of flexibility in the actual charging of the rent. The rent is established by the federal government.
Yeah, we literally, if we have this cross-reference between bedroom mix and AMI level,
Yeah.
that lives for 55 years, and then
Yeah.
we go get those corresponding income figures, we get the updated utility allowances. Here are the maximum rents. You may, in fact, not be able to collect them because something's above market, so they would collect less from a tenant. They would charge less.
So it only affects the maximum rent, not the minimum rent. Is there a minimum rent?
No, but obviously, affordable housing with these restricted rents, a landlord has to be very cognizant of long-term maintenance and quality of the property. So they're motivated to keep the rents close to the ceiling because they want to maintain it, and you want them to maintain it very well as well.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Looks like we are ready to move on to Amanda down there for our last section. Passing of the laptop. Check.
All right, well, we went from good morning to good afternoon. So thank you for sticking with us. I am the last presentation. So my name's Amanda Tropiano. I'm a principal with De Novo Planning Group, and I'll be working with the city of Temecula over the next few years on your general plan update. If I look familiar, it's because I did help you with your housing element update several years ago. So I am excited to be here today to talk a little bit more comprehensively over what you can expect the general plan to do in regards to proactively planning for your housing needs. So we have talked about the general plan a bit today, and I did want to just remind everyone that every city and county in California is required to adopt and maintain a current general plan. A general plan is a policy document that serves as the blueprint for how decisions are made, not only related to land use and housing, although that's an important component of it. General plans cover a range of other topics, which we'll discuss as part of this presentation. It is forward-looking, so we are specifically envisioning what the community will look like, what it could operate as 20 years into the future. And while every city and county in California has to have a general plan, they are each unique. So Temecula's general plan reflects your community goals and values, and in particular will be responsive to the input that we receive from your community as part of this public process. Your current general plan was adopted in 2005. We saw that history earlier this morning. And it's time for a comprehensive update to it, similar to many other jurisdictions, kind of embarking on that 20-year horizon of their past general plan. It's distinctly different from your zoning code or your development code, including your specific plans. Your general plan is sort of the top of the planning pyramid, and things like your zoning code, your specific plans, or planned communities, those have to be consistent with and implement your general plan. So your general plan is absolutely setting the top tier policy guidance, and all these other plans fall under it and are consistent with it. A general plan is essentially a big book. I see Matt has a copy of it in front of him. He has it in a binder. And it includes chapters, or you may hear me call them elements, that relate to certain topic areas. And each of these chapters or elements is going to have some narration. It's going to describe the topic. It's going to include a series of goals, so aspirational visions of where the community wants to go over the next 20 years. It's going to include policies, which are specific obligations that the city is making in terms of policy direction to help realize those goals. It includes a series of implementation actions that direct staff on what to do in order to achieve those goals. And it's going to include maps or figures which delineate different topic areas visually on a map of the city of Temecula. As I mentioned, each element is reflective of the goals and priorities of the community. With that said, there are numerous requirements dictated by state law that describe what we need to include in a general plan. We seek to consider potential impacts to the environment or to the community in developing those goals and policies. So where we can think about ways to mitigate those environmental impacts as part of the policy document, we do try to do that. And then they all need to be internally consistent as well. So you can't set a goal or policy as part of the land use element and have something contradictory in the public safety element. So why is the city updating its general plan right now? Well, certainly a lot has changed since 2005. There's been changes to the economy, to the market dynamics, to your demographics, not only in the sheer quantity of the people that live here in Temecula, but the profile of those individuals and their needs and long-term desires may need to be updated as part of this process. There have been, as we've seen, a number of laws related to housing implemented since 2005. There's been a whole host of other requirements that describe the way cities need to plan for mobility, climate change, environmental justice, just to name a few, need to be addressed as part of the general plan, and this comprehensive update affords the city the opportunity to do that. We also have the opportunity to take the timely direction created through the quality of life master planning process and ensure that your general plan policy direction is consistent with those qualities and vision. And then, if you can believe it, prepare for the 7th cycle housing element update, which is coming up. So the housing element that you currently have adopted and certified, the planning period is from 2021 to 2029. And as you remember, that process does take time, so we don't start planning your next housing element in 2029. It's several years prior to that to make sure that when the new planning period starts, you're ready to go. So a little bit more background on the housing element, because I want to describe what's included in that chapter of the general plan and what the other chapters touch on and relates to housing. So we've talked about this a little bit today. I'll try to supplement where it's new information. Again, the housing element is really the city's plan to meet your RHNA or your fair share of the regional housing need as determined by the state. It has to be updated every 8 years. So that's distinctly different than your general plan update, which does not need to be updated on any specific schedule. Generally, communities update it every 15 to 25 years or so. So you're kind of right in the middle of that. And if you kind of overlap those two ideas, it's not often that a comprehensive general plan update and housing element update are done at the same time. So Temecula is in a pretty common situation where it had its housing element, you updated it on the state cycle, and you're doing your general plan consistent with kind of the sequence of your general plan history. Your fair share, or your RHNA, again, starts with that allocation from the state of California. It looks at an 8-year planning period. That was from 2021 to 2029. The state says, the state's in a housing crisis. The state needs to plan for millions of units during this planning period. It allocates a portion of that statewide need to your metropolitan planning organizations. Here, you're in the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG region. So SCAG gets kind of a portion of that statewide target, and then it uses its own methodology that takes into account lots of variables like socioeconomic information related to population trends, household income, home prices, commute patterns. It has kind of a black box formula, and it allocates its regional distribution to each of its local jurisdictions, including the city of Temecula. So we've already heard that RHNA is broken down into those income categories, and overall, the city's responsibility is to plan to accommodate those number of units based on income category, based on a set of definitions provided by the state to, what type of product constitutes a household that is affordable to a low income or moderate income, and so on. You've seen this slide before, so it's just a reminder of what that overall unit count is. This is an exhibit that's included in your adopted and certified housing element. This is your 6th cycle, or your 2021 to 2029 inventory. And you can see where all of those sites that were identified to accommodate the city's RHNA are located throughout the community. As part of this process, I did want to emphasize that the city of Temecula was able to identify sufficient land to accommodate your 6th cycle RHNA within your existing planning parameters. So you might have heard other communities needing to rezone or upzone specifically in order to accommodate their RHNA. They did this inventory, and their RHNA was 2,000 units, and they inventoried their community, and they only had sites for 1,500 units. And they needed to go out and find new land to be upzoned or redesignated to close that gap. Temecula did not have that situation. You identified, as part of your 6th cycle inventory, sufficient land to accommodate your RHNA within your existing planning framework. Your zoning, your specific plans, your general plans had those tools available. But it was, close. So we wanted to make sure that as part of this process, we are recognizing that as we project forward into the 7th cycle, what you have out there right now, some of that is developing. Some of that will develop at assumptions different than what we thought it would in the housing element. That's just the nature of development in any local community. So we are really proud that the city was able to plan proactively over the last 10 and 15 years to accommodate your 6th cycle. And this is the opportunity to start thinking about that for your 7th cycle. So how will the general plan as a whole address housing? So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these topic areas, but first is an understanding of opportunities and challenges facing the community, housing obviously one of those topics. We have a process to consider and evaluate different land use ideas. We're calling those alternatives, and then ultimately arriving at a land use map that we bring forward as part of the general plan update and study in the environmental impact report. There's the actual physical policy document that you see on the desk. This is where your goals, policies, actions, and maps are located, and then the environmental review process. And a through point through all of this is the engagement with the community, hearing what's important to your residents, to your community members, and reflecting that in each of these different topic areas. So for opportunities and challenges, we are right now, for those of you that have an opportunity to join us at one of our open houses, hosting a series of open houses to start to collect information from your community on a lot of different topics, including how and where new housing or mixed uses could be accommodated over the next 20 years. So one of the activities we've been facilitating in these open houses are laying out some large format maps of the community in kind of quadrant areas, having conversations with your residents, talking about where new uses could be accommodated over time, and actually noting those locations on the physical maps in front of us. We also are going to be looking at ways to identify key focus areas that need some sort of special land use attention. Oftentimes at the beginning of a comprehensive general plan update process, we just know that there are areas that need us to dive a little deeper. We don't know if that necessarily means a change in land use direction, if maybe it's something related to urban design or landscaping. It's just something needs some special attention as part of this process. We also seek to understand how well your current land use designations are working. So are they producing the types of development you're expecting? If you have residential or mixed use categories allowing for a range of certain densities, are those the densities that you're seeing being built on those sites? Are we hearing from the development community that there are barriers or challenges to developing projects within those designations that might be resolved as part of this process? And then we certainly do need to pay attention to state legislation on how cities plan for housing and be proactive in setting the city in the driver's seat for making sure, to the extent feasible, you are articulating the city's goals and desires as it relates to those topics. The land use alternatives process follows from this. So we gather all of this feedback, we synthesize the information, and we memorialize that in a set of potential conceptual land use maps or alternatives that we analyze. So you can imagine different series of maps of the city of Temecula, and maybe we've identified some special areas that need to be studied further, and we've identified different land uses or densities that may be different directions represented in those focus areas, and we have a series of maps. And we are going to think about where new housing or mixed-use projects, so standalone housing or housing as part of a mixed-use development, could be allowed in areas of the community where potentially it's not currently envisioned. And in each scenario, we take the direction provided by the colors and densities on the map, and we think about it from different perspectives. So we analyze if this focus area was to develop as a mixed-use project allowing densities up to 50 DUs an acre, what would the impacts be to the city's fiscal structure? How would that impact the local economy, both, pros and cons? Development also costs money to run and brings in some additional development revenue as well. How does it affect traffic? How does it affect the city's long-term growth projections? How does it relate to creating new opportunities for jobs or employment? And we think about it through all of those lenses, and we present that and articulate it as part of a series of documents, reports, and presentations that we share with the community, with your General Plan Advisory Committee, with your Planning Commission, and with ultimately the City Council. Once we collect that information on those alternatives, we help prepare a Frankenstein proposed land use map that we expect includes qualities of each of those alternatives. So what normally does not happen is the community and elected and appointed officials gather around one of the three alternatives and say, yeah, number one is perfect. Go with number one. It's usually components of each of these, or even maybe new ideas that have emerged through the process that are, brought together and reflected in one single land use map. And that map is ultimately brought forward and presented with the history of its evolution to the City Council for your input, confirmation, recommendations to move forward with analysis. When we come to you at that midpoint, we are not seeking authorized direction to change land uses on the map. You are not making any changes to the general plan land use map or the entitlement process at that time. We are seeking some confidence level that we are generally reflecting the community's desire on that land use map so that we can kind of move forward with the process and have confidence that as we invest the city's time and energy to fleshing out the policy document, analyzing that map and the environmental impact report, that we're close, right? We don't want a lot of deviation from that subsequent to that time. And certainly as part of this process, we will be considering to the extent we can, how that map supports the city's success in planning for its 7th cycle housing element. So we do not have your 7th cycle RHNA numbers. The state was 18 months late getting them to us on the 6th cycle. So I don't have a crystal ball as to when we can expect them, but they will come eventually. And when they do, we want to be as prepared as we can. The general plan policy document itself memorializes the city's direction related to housing in your goals, policies, actions, and maps. So I become a bit of a language arts instructor when I start writing these documents, but it essentially, again, sets specific, actionable, measurable requirements for the city to undertake over the next 20 years to help realize those visions. And then ultimately, this is a project that is subject to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and we are required to prepare a program-level environmental impact report that considers the potential environmental impacts related to implementation of the general plan, which includes your land use map that we developed through that alternatives process. So we consider impacts to all of the environmental topic areas you're familiar with. We look at impacts to transportation. We look at impacts to air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, natural resources, water, all of the utilities, and so on. Once we complete that environmental review process, and the city should certify that environmental impact report, future projects that are consistent with that map and that environmental review are provided significant opportunities to tier off of or streamline from that environmental review. So if a project develops as it was envisioned in the general plan and the program environmental impact report studied most of those program level impacts, the amount of environmental review that a project has to undertake as part of that project specific analysis is going to be more minimal than a project coming in that's asking for a general plan amendment and wasn't studied in the EIR. So it's a massive opportunity to communicate to the development community and to property owners and developers that this is what the city expects to see here. This is what we've studied here. If you want to do what we studied, we give you this opportunity to streamline your subsequent environmental review. It also puts the city in the best position to seek grants and funding for shovel-ready projects. So you're just taking it as far as you possibly can. What the program environmental review can't do is, look specifically at the architectural design or the ingress and egress of a project. We're thinking holistically about what types of uses could be there. So there is some additional review that's typically required for projects unless they are exempt, as we've heard earlier. But for those that are not, they will typically need to do some specific project level analysis and demonstrate their consistency. So it is an opportunity to really, again, put the city in the driver's seat and communicate what the city's vision is for these different areas. So that's kind of the broad brush of what the general plan does in regards to planning for housing. We are maintaining the city's current general plan's housing element. Again, that cycle runs on a state mandated updated cycle from 2021 to 2029. We're, not touching the housing element because you do have state certification from that, and we want to keep that very much. So the rest of the general plan's kind of working around that. But again, we're thinking what the future holds. How are we going to be planning for that next cycle and more comprehensively just meeting the city's housing needs for the next 20 years. So the end of my presentation are the same 3 questions that Matt presented earlier. And you've heard a lot today, certainly from different perspectives that influence questions you may have, answers to the questions up here. These, I believe, are really intended to be prompts to help facilitate the discussion. If there's anything else I touched on or any other speaker touched on related to the general plan, what we're hoping to seek from you this afternoon is some additional guidance, any additional insights or words of wisdom you have to help us make sure that the investment you're making in your general plan update process is addressing the components of long-term housing needs that you're looking for it to do, and that we're able to make sure our work program reflects that, and we can coordinate with your community, including your general plan advisory committee, in helping to address those questions as part of this. We also have the opportunity to come back to you to dive deeper into any more comprehensive topic through a series of study sessions. Our work program includes that, it anticipates it. Those can be with the city council, those can be joint sessions with the planning commission, it could be joint sessions with your GPAC. So we have a lot of flexibility in the way that we may address some more difficult topics as we go. If there's anything that falls into those categories, we definitely would like that feedback today as well, that we'd like to have a little deeper dive into, and we can find an opportunity to do that as part of this too.
Thank you very much. So I think it might be best just to go down the line, 1, 2, 3, and we can start off with question number 1. What areas of the city should be considered to address future growth to accommodate state-mandated housing laws? Councilmember Schwenk, like to start us off?
Sure, thank you very much. And I want to say before I get into answering these questions, I just want to say thank you for the presentation. There's a lot of information. I mean, I think someone mentioned this could be a 3-day workshop. Thank you for it not being a 3-day workshop. But I mean, it really speaks to the volume of information that we're trying to digest. And a lot of this we know, a lot of this is really to help the public understand, you know, sort of what's going on and what we're up against. One of the things that I noticed was this idea that this general plan is built on community goals and values, right? And so sending this out to the GPAC and out to the community, which is why I've been promoting so heavily these workshops, these drop-in workshops, which have been really great, because you want community to be involved, right? But there's a tension. So we had a whole section on state mandated housing laws, right? And so there's this tension between what residents want. You could ask someone, say, well, I moved here because of these things. And then you have the state saying, no, we're going to do this, right? I think it speaks to how important planning is, right? And we've been a very heavy planning city, and it's served us well. And so I think this process is part of that planning for the future, which is so, so important. Because if you don't plan, you have the builder's remedy, and you have these forces pushing against you saying, well, if you're not going to do this, we're going to do it for you. But I'm struggling with this from a representation perspective. When you're elected by people in your city that want a certain thing, and that's butting up against, you know, this larger statewide, nationwide housing shortage, right? And so we're trying to find a way to sort of move through this. And I think, you know, through this planning process, we're going to get there. So, you know, having said that, I think for the first question, what areas of the city should be considered to address future growth to accommodate state mandated housing laws? I don't recall if I saw the mall property proper in the last land use map as an option. But I do think, and it was mentioned, I think Marcella, you mentioned this regional malls being, you know, an opportunity. I think if you look at some of the nicer upscale malls in Southern California, they're starting to add housing or housing very close to it. I think that's probably a natural fit. Even some of our smaller strip malls, Margarita Crossing, which is where Wahoo's Taco is. It's actually kind of a faux mixed use. If you look at the architecture, it's like this 2 to 3 story building, but there's nothing up there. It's just sort of for looks. So I think there are some opportunities for those types of sites. But again, it's sort of butting up against current residents and how they feel about, you know, adding housing to, you know, the corner of Margarita and Rancho Cal, let's say, right? There's going to be some concerns we're going to have to work through. But I think if we're looking at where should we look to address this and provide planning opportunities, I think those are probably, you know, where we're going to have to start. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Stu?
Well, I agree with Councilmember Schwenk. I actually grew up in the Chicago area, and we had lots of malls everywhere. And the last time I was out there, I saw a whole bunch of condos, in what was once a big empty parking lot. And so, and a lot of these shopping centers were built with excessive amounts of parking spaces. And so for that to be reprogrammed into housing makes perfect sense to me. I also think the Uptown Jefferson area is also an opportunity to do that mixed use model for residential and business. And so I think that's always a good thing. But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, everybody who lives here doesn't want anybody else to move here. And so I got my house, you stay away. And so that's prevailing attitude out there. So yeah, it's definitely a fine line that we try to walk on adding housing without creating more congestion and more. And that's what people are real upset about Altair. And as I said, no, I mean, think of all those people who are going to live there. They're going to enter to get to the freeway from the opposite side of Temecula. So they're not adding any traffic to the residential side of Temecula as far as, getting on and off the freeway. So it's an education process too, trying to calm people down, make them understand, what's happening and why it's happening. And, the state mandated housing laws are a very, very real thing. And so, and we're trying to negotiate this very intrepid waters. So that's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart. Councilmember Ron.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree. I mean, let's get creative with where we want to talk about housing, because I mean, we've spent the better part of this morning talking about all the policies, the regulations, the laws that are constraining and what the incentives that are out there. But I mean, it's not really working, is it? Because we're still not meeting our total housing needs. And then we've got folks and advocates within the affordable sector who come to our council meetings, who advocate for housing and tell us about the problems that they're facing. And I think that's representative of, a larger population out there saying, hey, we're trying to meet this demand and we want to be able to work in your city, but we can't afford to work here. We certainly can't afford to buy here, right? And what I'm seeing is a lot of what we talk about, and the state included, is the focus is on rental, not purchase. And so it's hard to move out of a lower income. And we all know that a lot of generational wealth, and you can have all these stories about how, ownership really does change that model, because you're not just throwing away money at rent every month, right? And so, so there's this bit of a disconnect, and I'm so I appreciate all the conversation, but I'm not sure any of that really gets at, and there's conversation about housing trusts and other things that could be different ways of approaching this. And I think that's probably where we need to focus a little bit more of the discussion, and especially as we start attacking the general plan, because if it's not working on all of the needs of our community and what we're trying to support as far as a working population or even a veteran population or a special needs population or a senior population, right? If it's not working for that population or on the timeline that we need it, right? That's the other problem is, it takes a long time to get these projects done. And it's kind of like transportation projects in a lot of respects, right? By the time you finally get that freeway expansion done, the traffic volume has increased dramatically, and you're never quite keeping pace. And that's kind of where we're always chasing the curve here and never quite getting in front of that. So I would like us to have more of a conversation of identifying those potential solutions that include workforce housing, for ownership housing, the entry level housing. You can't call a $500,000 home, entry level. I mean, just simply can't, because there's no way you make that, especially with interest rates and everything else. That you can't make that equate to. It used to be, well, look, I'm paying this much for rent. I might as well pay that much for a small house, right? That doesn't exist right now. So how do you create that? How do we do that? And especially in the current legislative environment we're in. That's where I think we could spend a little bit more time in this conversation. But one of the biggest pieces is we have to be able to identify the barriers to doing something like a housing trust, right? And the barriers are obviously just starting with the legislation itself. It doesn't really facilitate its well based on all the laws and regulations we have in California. It's like I said, it's really focused on rental. It's not focused much on, for purchase. And so how do we change that dynamic? Because the state's not going to do it for us. So, it has to be something that comes from within. And both Stu and Zach, I think you both mentioned there's the stigma behind this as well. That anytime we start talking about affordable housing, there's a stigma, and folks are like, whoa, wait a minute. The kind of folks that move into affordable housing. We don't want that in our neighborhoods. And we've had, big pushes against these projects in town because of a stigma, not understanding that these are the same folks who are sending their kids to your same kids' elementary schools and struggling to support you through our sheriff's department, our nurses, our resident doctor, and they are considered low-income employees. So we have to deal with that. And then just I'd say the development incentives. After RDA disappeared, I equate this to sort of the behavioral health conundrum we're in California, where as it trickled down to local government is ill-prepared or even financially able to address all of the behavioral health and homelessness issues that are crises in many of our communities. And yet that's where the bottom line is, and we have to try and figure this out. I equate it to the same thing. The state has failed us with, redevelopment. They took those authorities away from us, saying, we don't trust you to spend that money anymore. And rightfully so. There were a lot of stupid projects out there, not necessarily here in Temecula, right? So we got punished because of a lot of other activity. And now you see, you mentioned like the 4% and the 9%, and all these are great programs that nobody can seem to qualify for. And nobody can see, this 6-month timeline. Like you'll get kicked out of this just because of some random delay that comes in a 6-month timeline. I mean, it's so prohibitive to get these things done that this is why nothing's getting done. So so anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox here, but that's kind of where I see all this is that, we're talking around the subject, but if we really want to tackle this, we need to be able to come up with something on our own that can really meet that need. And it's not just building more rental units, it's building something that's accessible to ownership as well.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Ron. Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So one of the things with this question, you're going to see probably by number 3, I formulated a ton of questions kind of at the end to bring to the GPAC, which is really, I think, going to be a big influence, hopefully, for our city to be able to ponder. But when we're looking at number 1, as we're sitting there saying, we want to take a look at the state mandate housing laws. I think Peter had said it well, and it was the fact that there's overregulation. So I feel as if almost we're here in California putting ourselves in a hamster wheel. It's like the state sits there and says, well, hey, we want more housing. But at the same time, they're going to bring in something like AB 130 with the VMT housing tax. And they're going to make it even more challenging and more expensive for developers to be able to build. So it's round and round we go, whether hiding it or whatnot, but it is a challenge. I work every single day with individuals who fall within the low to low moderate area, and they're struggling, there's no doubt. There's not enough housing out there for that group. I understand 100%. But sticking to the question, because I feel like I'm going to come to number 3 and really kind of push it out there for questioning. If there's any type of growth, if there's anything, I would say, looking again at the Uptown Jefferson kind of for mixed use, but I almost look at this as like question 1, 2, and 3, we can almost spend like an entire couple hours on each question diving in. For their own workshops, kind of spreading out a map a little bit more and taking a look a little deeper into the city and diving into that and having those conversations. That could be in itself some conversations as we dig in. But I would just say mixed use in the Jefferson area. But again, I listened to Matt, and he brought up a good point when we're talking about health. When we're looking at CEQA, and there's just, again, I just feel as if our state is in a complete hamster wheel, and they don't really want us to ever get out. And it's a sad position, because I think if we had more local control, we could do a lot better with what we have. But Sacramento wants to continue, again, to put their boot on our face and mandate how we consider our city to move forward, when we, the residents, and the city know exactly the best thing for our residents. I'm just tired of it. So I'll come to number 3.
Thank you very much. I don't have much to add other than what my colleague said, as well as, like Councilmember Ron said, focusing on home ownership would be a big one for us here. I can't confirm or deny if the affordable housing model in California has succeeded or failed, but I think home ownership is the model of the future, and I think we need to focus on somehow, even if it's the limited equity model. Habitat for Humanity has 6 in the works that follow that model. I think that's a model that I tend to lean towards. But other than that, we can go on to number 2. It sounded like we already kind of hit on that with the introducing residential into existing commercial areas. Councilmember Schwenk talked about the mall. Mayor Pro Tem talked about Uptown Jefferson. I think, we're already talking about the Target Shopping Center. If any of my colleagues have any other, existing commercial areas that they believe would be a good design for residential, feel free to mention it. And you can also go right into number 3 if you have any thoughts on number 2. If not, we can start off with number 3 as well.
If I can dive in.
Absolutely, Mayor
For
Pro Tem.
one quick thing on that. I think one of my biggest, is that working? I think one of my biggest concerns too is just taking a look when we're talking about that commercial area. Let's even say in the Jefferson Uptown area, what does that look like for parking? We're already seeing here in Old Town where we have some mixed use that there's issues with parking, there's complaining, and we're going to get it either way. But what is that going to look like for us further down for parking for individuals for those housing? So that's one thing that I just want to kind of take a look at, and how does that affect that?
Absolutely. Anyone have any more thoughts on number 2? Councilmember Ron?
Just 2. I mean, I already mentioned the one, and I know this commercial, I would throw industrial in this conversation as well, because by nature of what the state's done, it's kind of already in there. But, let's emphasize the environmental justice piece and the environmental protections, because if we don't provide the backstop to that, no one will. The other thing is a lot of the infrastructure to this. So it sounds great in theory, but we've distributed our police and fire resources based on a certain design in our community and response times. And so if we shift our, community responses in such a way where a bulk of our population is in an area where, those response times don't match up with, emergency issues, then that, that's something we need to be able to be aware of. And then the same goes for all of the other infrastructure surrounding it, right? Part of the reason why people like Temecula is it's, walkable, it's bikeable, it's accessible, it's all of these other things that we're trying to do. But if your child's school is nowhere near an existing commercial area, and the busing infrastructure isn't going to support picking up your kids from that location, and so we can build all the housing we want to, but if there's no nearby grocery store or dry cleaner or whatever folks are interested in having, this is the whole point of why we do zoning in the first place, right? Is to make those compatible uses adjacent and convenient. So if we just start throwing housing willy-nilly just to say, oh, it's affordable and all this kind of stuff, then we might as well just not do a general plan update. But in theory, I'm supportive of the idea, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying, sorry.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, my big concern about putting housing in commercial area is the fact that commercial area creates job. It creates economy. It creates a whole lot of things that makes a city move. And so, and once it's gone, it's gone. So do we want a community full of just nothing but bedrooms eventually? So I think we got a fine line. We've got to travel down this road, because I'm less enthusiastic about converting commercial areas into housing, but more okay with converting parking into housing, such as around a mall, such as, where there's a bunch of basically wasted space. Yes, let's utilize that space, but I hate the thought of taking away the commercial dollars that come with a commercial center. And so that's my big concern, and that's what I would probably be cautioning against as we move forward, is just let's keep our commercial areas commercial. And yeah, it's going to go through a cycle where, commercial maybe not all that, but cycles happen. And once it comes back, we want to be in a position to accept it and bring it back into our community. So, and like I said, once it's gone, it's gone. So that's my thought.
Well said and great points. Councilmember Schwenk.
Yeah, thank you. I want to follow up on that because I completely agree with you, Stu. The idea of replacing, commercial areas with housing is probably not the best idea. I mean, we've seen it kind of with like places of worship, right? Where you have these like commercial areas and then churches move in, and we don't really have like neighborhood churches anymore. So you're taking away this commerce, but I think the key would be to do mixed use, right? Like, so you're keeping the commerce, like you're keeping the businesses. You've got ground floor businesses, but then you've got, 2 or 3 stories of residential. I think that adding that to the mix, just what we've done in Old Town, what we'll do in Uptown Jefferson, if you do that versus just wholesale replacing, I think is really the important way to do it. So.
Well said. Councilmember Stu.
That was a great comment, Zach, because it made me think that even in an area like a shopping mall, why not, if we were going to allow condos, let's say, for instance, why not have some mixed use in that whole condo complex? Let's add a convenience store or something that keeps keeps that community in that community. So offer some commercial areas, a barber shop, a beauty shop, something that keeps them in that general region. I mean, I think we're in a position right now where we need to start thinking outside the box and thinking about traffic issues and traffic impacts. And the more we can create that kind of design into our housing element, I think the better the city's going to be. And I think people who even live in those units are going to find themselves going, this is really cool that we have this all right here in this little complex. And, and because it's tied to a major shopping mall, let's just say, the whatever business is there is going to be able to draw from those commercial customers who are driving around. It's up to them to advertise, obviously, but to be able to pull from that same customer base that the mall is getting and say, hey, right here in this, and again, it's up to design. We could design it any way we want, but if we have like the businesses facing outwards with the residential above and on the interior, I think it could kind of have a dual purpose. So anyways.
No, I completely agree. I think mixed use is the way of the future here in Temecula. And I think Stu's Barbershop on bottom with a limited equity for sale units up top will look great. All right. Yes.
Yeah, but just real quick, I mean, again, quality of life issues. So if we're not co-locating things like parks and other things, then yeah, all right. And again, we've got 40 some odd parks in the city, not near the mall necessarily, and not near, so if we're going to do something like this, you still have to consider the quality of life issues of, what are we going to be providing those families or those residents as far as adjacent uses? Because, again, kind of goes with what Temecula was trying to achieve in the first place.
Well said. All right. Question number 3. Mayor Pro Tem, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Kick that off gladly. Thank you. So I did my homework, obviously, and we actually had a meeting at WRCOG that started my brain kind of thinking about some different areas that maybe I don't know if we've ever considered or thought about to dig into. I just want to go over there's 4 areas. I know some of them we've thought about, but the first one that was actually brought up at WRCOG, Chris had talked about at a city council meeting in Canyon Lake just a couple weeks ago. And one of the things when we take a look at it's our population rate, which is called the TRF, total fertility rate. And some of the concerns that when we drive in, when we're looking at the next 5 to 10, 20 years, what is going to be our population? So looking at population itself to sustain a community is at 2.1%, or a ratio of 2.1. California currently right now is at 1.48. So we are below the rate for total fertility rate in the sense that we are not going to have the population that we have today in another 20 plus years. Now, Riverside County, because of where we're at, is a little different. We have a little bit younger generation here. So we are a little bit above that. We're sustaining. But what impact is going to happen to us later on in the next 20 years? What does that look like? So that's one of my questions is, are we taking a look at the future on the population of California? You know, we're taking a look that even hospitals in the area from starting in 2024 with San Dimas County Hospital, Hemet Hospital have already closed their maternity wards, and also Southwest Healthcare in Corona is now closing theirs in 2026. So we're seeing that affect cities. We're seeing it affect hospitals. And that's my next question I bring in is, how is this going to affect our ER? How is this going to affect emergency services for our residents? So if we're bringing in a higher population of people, what does that look like for our hospital? Our hospital currently right now is wanting to expand on their emergency room area because they need more beds. Well, right now, what happens when we go over what we have estimated for this city's population or what they can maximize or use? So, or, you know, to be able to take care of individuals. So that's another area. I'd like to be able to talk to the hospital and see how is this going to impact them, their doctors, and their ER. Going into that impact area as well, you know, with more housing, how is that going to impact our sewers, our electricity, our utilities? Again, I believe Councilmember Ron brought up the fact of schools. I mean, this is stuff we've been talking about over and over and over. And then traffic. Now, as I was listening to Chris about a month ago, traffic is horrible, don't mistake me, but also it is good because it shows that we're being, our city is prosperous, we're doing well. But again, striking that balance and finding the right way to continue to move people forward is going to be a great way for you guys to start segmenting into the general plan on how we're going to be able to move traffic along. So it's not, we're doing well as a city. Let's call it, we're doing really well. Part of that concern also is looking at unfunded mandates and how they're affecting our first responders and our budget, looking at TCSD and our quality of life here in the city. Those are all very much big concerns of mine as we are moving forward with economically. Part number 3, looking at survey of the residents. So just recently, in case the public's watching, we just recently did a survey and it's still in draft form, so I don't want to get into too much. But when we look at number 2 on that survey, there's a number 2 question, the priority of residents. On that number 2, they said limit and reduce growth and development. Now, we kind of talked about that just a little while ago. It's the city and themselves, the residents, they don't want to get impacted with a lot more people. We have the state coming in and saying, no, you have to. And again, thank you. Here is that hamster wheel going round and round, but who do I work for? I don't work for the state. I work for the residents here in our city. And that's who, personally, me, I have to listen to. Now, again, I need to be able to allow housing to be able to flourish, streamline, make sure it's done well. But again, I have to listen to the residents. And when I look at at the list of priorities, the second to last list of priorities is subsidized housing. I'm looking at exactly what the residents who have elected me into this position in this seat is wanting me to vote for. So I want to make sure we're looking at that as well and making really good decisions moving forward. Almost finishing this. The last one I kind of touched on a little bit, I believe, with question number 1 is the VMT tax that just passed for AB 130. As people have said, it was buried within the California budget bill. And it is going to, if I can just bring this up, it's on my computer, it is going to increase housing for developers, which we all know is going to end up getting trickled down to the consumer. And my phone or my computer just died. And so my concern is the fact that the consumer, the taxpayer, but once again is going to end up paying for more of this. Okay, here it is right here. So I just want to read this. The VMT housing tax burden in budget bill could affect and add $324,000 per house or apartment. The Coalition of Affordable, Reliable, and Equitable Housing warns that tax will drive up housing costs, destroy jobs, and worsen the state affordability crisis. The tax could reach $324,000 per home or apartment, and a crushing burden that translates into an equivalent of $2 penalty for every extra mile driven over our government set driving limits. And if I can add this last part in, it says the coalition breakdown on the impact of the new VMT housing tax raises new home prices on the top of an existing mandate that already adds $197,000 to the price of a new home, increases monthly rents to $1,358, a 48% jump of the state median, and this is going to be within the next 20 years, disproportionately harms low-income and minority housing households of color, and stalls housing production and eliminates construction and trade jobs. I would like for us to be able to dive deeper into that. How is this going to affect our people? This is why I'm saying it's a hamster wheel. It's a constant hamster wheel of we want to make more housing, but they're not making it more affordable. And who's the one who's paying for it is the taxpayers. So these are areas I think that we need to dive into, and I'd like to have more of an understanding so that way I can, as we move forward, I can make better decisions for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Schwenk, question number 3, and any closing statements?
Yeah, no, for number 3, I'm really excited to see the GPAC get started. I think this Thursday is the first meeting. We appointed a really broad cross-section, diverse group of people to the GPAC, and I'm not really wanting to give any specific direction to the GPAC. I really want to see what flows out of that GPAC. So again, I don't have anything specific that I want you to sort of carry for me to the GPAC. I think seeing what they come up with is part of this, right? They are part of the community, and I think that's important. So nothing for me.
Councilmember Ron?
I have 3 items. First is property tax. So when we start to talk about our veteran community, special needs community, or our senior community, one of the deal breakers for a lot of these folks to want to live, even if the house is paid for, is a property tax issue. And so I'll give you an example. I was talking to one person who in town has a potential home in the future where their special needs son could live, right? And obviously they're on disability and so forth, and so there's limitations on what kind of job they can have, and they're trying to create this sort of self-sufficient model. But even under that existing model and the current property tax, financially it's not viable, right? So even in a free home, an individual who works maybe at a low income job and maybe has special needs or whatever, and you can equate this to seniors, you can equate this to, veterans or others, can't afford to live in town because of the property tax and insurance and everything else that's applied to that, right? So, I mean, what do we just say? Oh, that's too bad. Sorry, even with a free house, you can't live here. I mean, it's a little ridiculous, right? And so I'd like us to explore. I mean, other states, I know California hasn't enacted anything substantial with regard to like waiving property tax issues for veterans. Other states like Texas, I know have. Again, if we're relying on the state to solve this problem for us, we'll may never reach that. But is this something that I'd like to see us explore this? And Peter and Marcel, I'm sure you have the answer for me somewhere, but all right, thumbs up. But seriously, I think this is an important issue because it's really prohibitive in a lot of respects, and yet it's something that's missing entirely from the housing conversation. The other piece I think is important is to lean into. So we've talked about workforce housing and all that. One of the things that we have is this growing higher education footprint or education and training footprint through MSJC, Cal State, and others. But we don't specifically have any student housing associated with that. And this is both for traditional and non-traditional students. So, a lot of our students are commuting into the campuses to do their, schooling, right? And a lot of things are now remote and all of that, but it's still important to have access to your college campus for the library or other resources or whatever's going on, right? But we don't specifically have anything for students, and the stuff that's around there, got plenty of housing, but again, not specifically for students or the population to feed into that. And then just to put it out there as well, even a new, tenure track professor working at MSJC doesn't make enough money to buy a house here in town either, right? So, all along that sort of education pathway, if we're trying to foster this as a cornerstone of what Temecula provides, we are definitely not doing our part to foster the housing side of that element. So I'd like to see the GPAC focus a little bit more on that. And then simply the commerce, because there's fantastic commerce between where the higher education centers are and, adjacent, Costco and shopping and the mall and everything else. And we're talking about housing near the mall, and this could be student housing options, So there's a nexus there, but there's no serious conversation about how do we create that. And I know folks at MSJC are very interested in having and fostering that conversation. So that's it. Yeah. And then, I mentioned the last piece was the housing trust and all that. Let's make sure we have a solid conversation about that, whether it's a pilot project or whether it's a partnership with Habitat for Humanity. I know they've gotten into, different types of housing models, not just their traditional sort of thing, looking at covenants to protect the value of those homes into the future so that, we don't sell something as affordable now that in 3 years becomes non-affordable. I'd like to see us walk down that path. And we've talked about this in the past, but again, nothing's ever really materialized. And so if we don't get sort of the council's support behind this and say, no, these are important pieces of the puzzle, we'll just keep having these conversations over and over. So I'm really looking at my colleagues here to say, hey, can we make a decision to, lean heavily into this space to really have that conversation, bring the folks at the table, not just in a vague, sort of arbitrary conversation, but really directed toward solving, at least that part of the problem, or at least developing some kind of pilot program to demonstrate that this can be done. So that's all I've got.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Stewart.
Well, I hate to be the bad news guy, but I don't really believe that this state wants us to own our own property. And because of property taxes going through the roof, but fire insurance is killing people. I mean, mine's up to like $7,000 a year, and they just announced a 36% increase. So, I mean, it's not going to be affordable for anybody to own real estate in California. I mean, they're literally trying to push us into a rental. I mean, you could build something for a low income person to own, but then they'll lose the house because they can't afford the fire insurance and the property taxes. So, I mean, it's a catch-22. This is a fire gone wild. I mean, we are. I can't even explain it to you. I think this state is in a lot of trouble, and when our insurance commissioner is now really the mafia boss that's controlling the fire rates, and it's not gonna pay back what you're gonna have to spend to maintain these properties. And so I think residential is going to really gonna look a whole lot more, and a lot of redevelopment, and all the federal and state programs are all about creating rental units. I really see that's the future, because everybody's gonna get priced out of their home. And so I don't know. I'm just listening to everybody, and I'm thinking, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. So the whole 36% increase just blows my mind. People are going to go without fire insurance who owns their property, If it burns down, they're done. They're selling their property, moving out of the state. And so, I mean, I really don't see a solution. We're talking like we have some sort of ability to do something about this, and in reality, we're being controlled by the state. And so, I don't know. I'm throwing my hands up. I have no idea. Thank you.
Well, it's nice going last because I can just say ditto and point to my left and right. I have nothing much to add other than I want to as well explore the housing trust, the CLT model, really give that a definitive exploration by the GPAC and the council, and go down that road to either yes or no it instead of dancing around it for the next couple of years. I think it's time to explore that and go from there. Other than that, just looking forward to the GPAC and that first meeting, like Councilmember Schwenk said, coming up here and everything that they come up with. I want to reiterate the thanks for city staff for putting this on, for the public for coming, to Heidi, Maricela, Peter, Paul. Hey, Peter, Rob, Paul. Hey, Peter. Amanda, everyone that was here, appreciate it. I think this was a good discussion. It was very informational, very educational. It was a great foundation moving forward for the GPAC, and we look forward to hearing more on housing in the future. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. With that, I will adjourn the meeting.